Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today in War Thunder we are back on the updates 1.95 dev server and it's time to have a look at the Porter on the DD-356. This is a new American destroyer that is coming to the game in updates 1.95 and you can find it in the fleet tech tree, and it's actually going to go between the Somers and also the Fletcher. So make sure that if you want to get the Somers first before this update comes out, you're going to have to research it now, otherwise the Porter is going to get into your way. But to be honest, looking at the Porter, it generally seems like quite a fun little machine. It has a lot of nice guns on it when it comes to its primary armaments. The only thing I would say is that the secondaries are definitely a little bit lacking. So with this Porter, it is your generic destroyer with 4 dual-mounted 5-inch guns, 2 on the front, 2 on the back. And then, of course, you have 2 sets of the Chicago typewriters. You have 2 sets of quad 1.1-inch guns, one right here, and then one here. And then you have 2 dual sets of 12.7 ANM2s and 16 torpedoes. So one of the things that we've seen with a lot of the vessels which are available, you can see the 12.7s here, is torpedoes are becoming a much larger thing for a lot of these vessels. And that is no different with the Porter at 4.3. The fact is, this vehicle will have 16 torpedoes on board. It will have 2 sets of torpedoes, as you can see here, in sets of 4, and then it will have a full reload for each of those sets of torpedo tubes. So obviously in arcade, this doesn't make too much of a difference because you can just reload, but in realistic, it does make a large difference because it means that you can expend some torpedoes where you want to, and then you can still have some left to be able to do some interesting things with. The other thing as well, there's 2 smoke funnels leading to a bunch of engines, which are incredibly large for the machine of this size, and it has a crew collection of 194. So it doesn't have a ton of crew members, but if you compare it to some of the machines around it, such as the Somers, the Sumner, especially with the Sumner, with the amount of people on that thing, the Fletcher, the Farragut, and also the Clemsons, it's much closer to the Clemson size of things than it is closer to stuff like the Fletcher and the Sumner, which are a hell of a lot bigger. So it's kind of middling in a way when it comes to its crew, but when it comes to its main guns, it is definitely not middling, just in the other areas it is. Looking at the general armor of the machine, it has 12.7 millimeters, which is defending the bridge. It also has 12.7 millimeters of a kind of pseudo belt idea around the center where the engines are, and then 3.175 millimeters around the guns. I love how precise that is. Then on top of that as well, it has access to not much else on the armor front apart from this deck here, which is another 12.7 millimeters. The hull itself is 23 millimeters of steel, and the superstructure is also 8 millimeters overall. You can see the very twisty and turvy ammunition elevators that we see here and the ammunition at the bottom. Since the ammunition is quite below the waterline, it might actually be hard to hit this because of how the shells work when it comes to naval. It might be much better at just shooting this side where they are a little bit more raised compared to the front of the machine. There's also some fuel tanks in here which seem incredibly small. Like there's the general ratios of this machine just seem kind of off. There are certain parts of it which seem rather large. There are certain parts of it which seem rather small. It's just kind of interesting, and also sits at 4.3, so it should be a pretty good destroyer, at least from that BR standpoint. Does mean that it might get up-tiered a lot though into 5.0s and 5.3s, and then you'll be crying all the way home. So the 127 millimeters, which is of course at the 5 inches, they start with HE, and this HE is okay. It has 37 millimeters worth of pen. It also has 3.22 kilos of explosive mass. So these guns have exactly the same explosive mass as pretty much the new guns on the Suzuya. So just to put that into perspective, the Porter also has some kind of interesting firepower ammunition after the fact for rank 1, 2, and 3, and they are interesting because I haven't really seen too many of these before. This is a common shell, a 5-inch common Mark 32, and what it seems to be is a HE shell but has a hell of a lot of pen to it. So 121, 108, 44, that's nothing to sniff at, and it still has, 1.15 kilos worth of explosive mass. There's also this shell here, which gives it a little bit more penetration, but once again, less explosive mass, so therefore that'll be your main penetrating shell. It also has access to a HEVT shell, which does have the same explosive mass as the normal HE, so therefore it's just it but modified, and also has the same amount of penetration. So at least for me, the main killer is going to be this HE shell, just because of the explosive mass, and then if I come up against anything which is a little bit heavier when it comes to the armor, so normally like cruisers and stuff like that, we're going to have to switch to the commons to be able to do a little bit more damage. Also, it doesn't really have anything else when it comes to its general modifications that really stands out. Instead, it just looks like a kind of easy affair. You do get the torpedoes off the bat, which is really nice actually, very nice to see that, but you don't get anything for the 1.1 inches, they're just stat with HEF, so therefore they're only going to be good against smaller vessels and also against aircraft. And the 12.7s are stuck with a really nice belt, you know, the APIT, the AP, the I, the AP, but it would be nice to change them at some point later on. The Porter as well, I don't believe has access to any skins. Nope, it is just how it is when you have a look at this machine. So let's get into a test cell and have a bit of fun with it. One of the nice things about these machines in the form of the Porter and also in the form of the Sumner and the Somers and all of the other American machines is the fire rate on their main guns, and I'll show you what I mean. One of the problems with a lot of destroyers mainly is that there are breaks between the firing, and this means that you can be able to you can try and kind of lick your wounds before another volley comes in, but with a machine like the Porter, if I set it up properly like here, and then for some reason it always goes to the left, so let's actually just do it again, right there, what you will find is if you do Synchronize Fire, or Unsynchronized Fire, you can just keep the fire going. By the time the last gun ends, the first gun is able to fire again, and you can just keep firing at the enemy and just keep plonking shells over there and do as much damage as you want. And this is something that a lot of other machines can't do. It's something that British ships, it's something that German ships, and it's also something that Soviet and also other machines struggle to do. It's a constant rate of fire. It's something which means that I can put as many shots as I want over in that direction as I want to, and there's nothing you can do to stop me unless you knock out some of my guns, which at least on this machine should be kind of easy to do. But the main thing you are seeing, or hopefully you understand here, is the fact that you can just constantly keep firing at the enemy at all times, keeping them under pressure all the time, making sure that there is no leeway for what you are about to do to them. It is something that not many nations can do, and it is also something that makes the Brooklyn and also the Helena incredibly strong. They have such a good fire rate, and there's also other machines which I'm sure the Americans will get, which also have insane fire rate, which will definitely be those machines which take over the game. Because DPM is the key right now in naval. The ideas of these larger guns just donking people, you have to hope that you are able to get a pretty good shot off with them instead of just constant barrage of fire. There were many shots back there on that destroyer which I missed, but the main thing is a decent amount of them hit and a decent amount of them did damage. Now against something like this that we see ahead of us, which I believe is a Kern or something similar to that, we're going to struggle to do damage, but hopefully we don't see too many of them in the coming wars ahead. One of the nice things that has been great over... Oh, goodbye. One of the nice things that has been good over the last few weeks, or well, not a few weeks, but a few months or few updates in War Thunder, is the fact that we have now a ton of destroyers. We have now what I would class as a BR of destroyers, and now hopefully that means the destroyers themselves will fight in themselves. The destroyers will have their own significant BR bracket, because before that just wasn't the case. What would happen is you would get up-tiered into light cruisers and you get annihilated. And then, if that didn't happen, you were annihilating others when you were fighting battle boats. So I'm hoping we can come to a compromise with the amount of destroyers that have been added, especially for the Americans, especially for the British and the Germans, that we can now, come and sit to the table and everybody can play destroyers against each other and have fun with them instead of this scenario, which is very, very depressing, which is either you do really well by annihilating battle boats and by annihilating a few destroyers on the enemy team, or you get crucified by light and heavy cruisers which just look at you and you die. And that's the thing about the Porter. The Porter, if the Porter is left in waters which are very similar to it, if it's left in waters full of British destroyers and German destroyers and American destroyers, it'll do pretty well because of its fire rates and because of its torpedoes and generally its overall speed as well. Even though the survivability isn't the highest, it can put out the DPM that is required. But once it gets up-tiered, it will get annihilated, and it isn't alone in that category. So hopefully, for the Porter, and for many of these other destroyers that have come to the game, they will solidify themselves and create their own BR meta. If not, unfortunately, we probably won't see many of these on the battlefield, apart from when people want to get to the Sumner. Or the Somers going past it. Hopefully that isn't the case, because I'd love to see this thing. It's a beautiful machine with some beautiful guns and some beautiful playstyles. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Blackie, Daniel Stanton, Jay Wilt, John Ryman, Joseph Anders, Martinez, Moxie, Super Cacti, Uyins Terry, Elove Goat, and Seductive Trashcan for supporting the channel.